I'd like to make a follow-up to my old Civil War video about Mark Millar's story being adapted into a big Marvel movie. You can find the link to it in the description, so you can watch it before this one. I won't be using any movie footage like I did for Star Wars. I don't want to get my video taken down by Disney again, so I will apologize for the low visual content. So let's get to it. I finally got to watch the third Captain America movie, Civil War. And if it had been just a typical Marvel movie like the first two, I wouldn't bother doing this video in the first place, as I left my point that Civil War was too flawed a story to be adapted in the first place, and as such, it would have to be reasonably changed to work, as it did. But the final result is much more interesting than I would have imagined. It's not simply a typical quality blockbuster movie, but something else entirely. And as such, I'd like to talk about it. So, obvious spoilers. So let's get to it. After a small intro to set up Bucky, the film opens up with an Avenger operation in a foreign desert country. They take this opportunity to explain the reasoning for the Registration Act. Scarlet Witch contains an explosion meant to kill Cap, but then gets thrown into a building instead, which kills a lot of people. This is a good change from the comic book version, which has a primary school being blown up by a villain thanks to a bunch of idiot reality show superheroes. It's less hammy and obvious, with the added value that it was simply a mistake done while on the job. Friendly fire is something that happens, and it's very important to show that in a reasonable, tangible way. Tony's background is also done better, with a simple scene that fleshes out his past and gives him a direct approach to his position. The woman who confronted him about her kid dying in the comic is now more rational, and he never sees her again, instead of having her inexplicably become some kind of background character throughout the story. Instead of a registration act that's exclusive to the United States, we have an accord, which would turn the Avengers into a team led by the UN Council. This makes much more sense, having it be a worldly position instead of an egotistical USA-only role. Because alien invasions just happen in New York, right guys? And even though the Avengers separate over this, in a very civilized and believable manner I might add, at least compared to the comic, the reason for the conflict is not a matter of political opinion, but the fact that Bucky Barnes is framed for a terrorist incident, leading Cap to defend him by acting a superhero role against the law, which also helps to introduce Black Panther as a superhero from his own country, hell-bent on revenge against Bucky, who he thinks killed his father in the incident. The pieces come together nicely. In the comic, Cap is stupidly ambushed by Maria Hill for no reason whatsoever, just to tell him to either accept government rule or be arrested. And the rebel group wasn't just focused on trying to find the truth behind the incident. It was a badly crafted political story which made no points whatsoever. While in this movie, it's entirely around the government blaming Bucky for the terrorist attack and people chasing Cap's team throughout the place. Scarlet Witch's teen angst is done pretty well, and she's better introduced here than in Age of Ultron. I wouldn't say the same for Vision. He starts out kind and full of potential, but then he switches to creepy too soon and without proper development. If we just say that it's because he's an android, that would just render him as a lousy character. It's really no excuse. He's a good character. Flesh him out. There's a big battle near the movie's climax, which ends up being completely decontextualized from everything else. Instead of building some kind of advanced countermeasure, which would be entirely within his character, as he's a weapon builder, Tony decides to recruit Spidey. A teenager from Queens with still undefined powers is recruited for an incredible, dangerous, potentially deadly fight because we need more super dudes on our side for the battle. It's the same thing with recruiting Ant-Man on the Cap side. His entire movie was about him staying away from illegal crap. Now, why would he accept this? It doesn't make much sense. It's just, comic book crossover logic. Let's get these people over here and let's not get them into any character development situation. Let's just get him to fight, and that's it. This is kind of when the movie breaks apart for me. Cap 1 was a fun superhero lighthearted romp. Cap 2 was a high-tech spy thriller about government morality. While Cap 3 seems to be a fusion between the spy thriller government stuff with the nonsensical, larger-than-life superhero fights that you see in the Avengers movies. And as expected, they don't merge well together. It's clashing of two different genres. It's kind of like mixing something like Star Trek with Doctor Who. It doesn't make much sense. Although I'll have to say that this is by far the best Spider-Man that we ever had in any movie. He feels like a genuine Peter Parker with all of his fun, none of his angst, and I love it. It's genuine, it's good. Also, the new Aunt May?
Marissa Tomei? Marissa Tomei? Marissa Tomei? Marissa Tomei? Marissa Tomei? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, the ultimate conclusion is brought on by the entire plot line about doubting Bucky being solved by a simple phone call to Tony, which, after a conflict, once again happens. It's shown that Bucky was the one who, under mind control, killed his parents. It's kind of like a Batman moment. So the villain's motivations are just that of a guy who wishes to split up the Avengers because he lost his family in one of the previous movies. It's supposed to be Baron Zemo, so he's no longer an evil Nazi scientist, but instead they're just pulling another Mandarin. I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly fine with that. I just think that the villain is just a means to a purpose instead of being an actual villain, which is it's a bit sad. In the end, there's another cool moment deconstruction where that one scene from the Civil War comic ending is brought back. Remember when Cap was gonna murder Tony Stark by cutting off his head with his shield over stupid political ideals? That moment is pleasingly deconstructed by having Cap do the exact same pose, only to cut off access to his power supply instead, which deactivates his armor without hurting him. It's a superhero thing to do. It's good. And this was because he was going to kill Bucky after he found out about his Joe Chill moment. Black Panther also decides to not kill Zemo after he found out about his trickery. Because after witnessing the constant revenge stupidity thing, he takes a sane standpoint. I like the development that they give Black Panther in this movie. It seems more like his movie than anyone else's. Most of Tony's Nazi bullshittery in the original comic goes over to Colonel Ross, which makes perfect sense since his personality fits perfectly with the whole arrest superheroes in a super jail. The interdimensional jail is now a giant submarine, which is still crazy, and the way they lock a bunch of people who would have been just perfectly restrained in a regular jail with proper countermeasures is insane. But you know, movie. The movie closes with Cap and the prisoner Avengers going into political asylum in Wakanda, and a message to Tony just going, just call me when there's a big crisis and we'll be on our way. We're still friends. Everything will be solved. Okay. It's just a setup for Infinity War, where their friendship will just be restored without any trouble. Civil War ends up being a competently done movie, based on a story without much basis to pick on to begin with. Putting the entire reason why it happens entirely on Cap wanting to protect his friend from facing justice is kind of stupid, but then again, it is a suitable solution to fix up this mess of a plot. What annoys me is the way that things get solved. The movie spends a lot of time building up tension and crisis, just so big combat situations can take place that don't end up in any sort of suitable resolution. Instead, things get resolved by tiny deus ex machina situations that seem shoved in for no reason whatsoever. For a movie franchise that presents itself as fun and enjoyable, it's a bit sad to see it succumb to cheap drama, especially when there are so many situations that call for everybody to sit down and talk things over along the movie. Civil War is still a really great movie and massively enjoyable, but it stands as the weakest link in the Captain America trilogy, and it's more of an Avengers inside drama plotline than a proper film that can be watched on its own merits. Overall, I was pleased with the way that it turned out, but I'm hoping that Disney settles with either lighter or heavier tones for future movies, because a mix of both simply does not work properly. Thank you for listening.